Ciao, friends. This is Patrick from Guy in the Cube, and you're probably wondering, what is Patrick doing on a SQL BI video? Well, I got an interesting DAX question, and it was actually coined as gaps and islands. So imagine you have these rows, and you have a row with 0, 0, 0, then you have a balance, then you have a balance, and you have a row with 0, 0, 0, and you wanted to count the zeros. But the challenge wasn't the count. The challenge was that every time a new set of zeros appeared, I wanted to restart the count. And I was kind of stuck, right? I got it to count, but I couldn't get it to restart. So I had to bring in the big guns. I emailed my friends over at SQL BI and I said, hey guys, I got a DAX questions. Can you help me out? And Alberto replied back. He was like, send it to me, Patrick. So you guys know how I like to do. Instead of all this talking, Alberto, take it away.
Yo, this is Alberto SQL BI, and in this video I'm gonna show you how I answered to Patrick's question. If this is the first time on this channel, make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay up to date with all the content we publish every week. And if you like this video, please send us a big thumbs up. Now, you know how I like to do things, no more of this talking, let's jump straight to my PC. Whoa! 30 seconds in Patrick's shoes and I'm already knackered. Let me go back to the good old boring Alberto. Now let's start to focus on the problem that Patrick describes. The goal is to compute the number of consecutive periods where a balance is 0. Now in Contoso we do not have balances, but we have products and we have sales. So we can solve a more generic problem, that is the number of periods, we use days, where a given measure is 0. And because we have sales amount as a measure, we're going to compute the number of consecutive days where the given selection of products has no sales. Let me show you that on the screen. I have this usual report. I put just the date and the sales amount, and you see that we have sales on the 1st, on the 2nd of January, then on the 4th of January, the third sale. That means here we have the first whole. It's not easy to see that because we are not seeing values where the sales amount is 0. So let me show items with no data. Now we have a whole here that is much easier to see, another one here, but there is a small number of holes. Probably by selecting some colors we have better picture. Now you see we have here 3 days with no sales. So my measure needs to count 1, 2, 3 and then go back to 0 because we have again sales. This is not probably the best use case, the best case we can look at, because I would like to see also holes at the very beginning. Like these are too many holes, so let's go for, oh my gosh, green. Well, green is good. Green should show 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, then 0, because we have the first day with sales, and then go on counting again. How do we compute such a number? Well, the idea is that we cannot count consecutive days, we cannot count periods this way. But what we can do is detect the last day where we had sales. So let's pretend that we are on the 9th of January. On the 9th of January, we have sales, so the result is 0. Let's go on the 8th of January. In the 8th of January, we go back in time, we search for the previous date with sales, which is the 6th of January in this case, and then we subtract simply from the 8th, the 6th, the result is 2, so we show 2 here. When we will be at the 7th of January, it will be 7 minus 6, and that will be 1. So the goal of the measure is to search for the previous last date with sales, the current date, and then we subtract one from the other. And that should be the number we are searching for. Let's try to write it. So we need, in order to compute that, we need the current date, we need the previous date with sales, and then it's a simple subtraction. Let's start writing code. A bit larger. We call it days with 0. Now we need the current date first. So let me save that in a variable, current date, and we take the max of date. And we return the current date. You know, I always do that because I want to debug my code step by step. And this is showing on the 10th of January, on the 11th, So this is the first step. Next step, we need to compute the previous date with sales. That requires using calculate. So previous date with sales. I need to use calculate because I want to play with the filter context. We compute the maximum of date. Yes, where the date need to be strictly less than the current date. Actually, no, I want it less or equal because when there are sales in the current date, I want that date, so the difference will be 0. But this is not going to compute anything because I want the previous date with sales. Now, if I search for the maximum of date, let me show you what we obtain. We obtain the same value because the last date less or equal than the current one is still the last date. So if I hit enter now, what you see here is that nothing changed. I need to search for the previous date with sales. And instead of searching it in date, I can search it in sales order date. Because that will return the previous sales, the previous date in the sales table. So if there are sales, I will find that date. And let me see if it works. Now we have on the 6th of January, we have the 6th of January. Then on the 7th and on the 8th, we have again the 6th of January. On the 9th, because we have sales on the 9th of January, we have the 9th of January. So these days with 0, this date is good. It is not actually really good because when we will compute the value here, and here, the result is blank because there are no sales before the current date. So I need a default value. That is, if there are no sales, I use the first date ever. So let me go back to the measure. We need the first date ever. Let's use the first date ever. And that is the minimum of... Now I can use date. But if I use minimum of date, I will obtain the minimum date in the current filter context. That's not what I want. I want the minimum date ever. That is, remove any filters. So now I have the first date ever. That should return the 1st of January 2010 everywhere. Oops. No way. 1st of January 2010 everywhere. And then what I need to compute is either the previous date with sales or the first date ever if the previous date with sales is a blank. Let me also format the code. So let's call previous date. It's just a coalesce of previous date with sales, and if that is blank, return me the first date ever. And that should work. Let's see the result. We have the 1st of January 2010 for the first few days, which is what we want. And then as soon as the previous date with sales start to compute a value, we have that value. Now it's just a matter of subtracting one from the other. So I can compute the result, which is the current date minus the previous date. And we can return the result. That's kind of weird because it's a date. You see, it's the 30th of December 1899 at 12 a.m., which is basically 0. Because previous date is a date, current date is a date, and a date minus a date is still a date. We need to convert it to an integer. And let's look at the result. It starts to work. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, then 0, because it's the first day with sales, then 1, 2, 0 again, and so on. So the problem is solved. The thing that I don't like, I was noticing it earlier, is that it takes quite a lot of time to compute. You see, it's circling, 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 and then it returns a value. If I select silver, yeah, it basically takes forever to compute the result. So next step is making a bit faster. We could try to make it faster by just looking at the code, but you know, whenever it's time to optimize performance, we do not spend time with Power BI. Instead, we grab the query, go to DAX Studio, and we do the optimization there. And yes, I'm wondering whether I need the performance analyzer, but actually no, this is just a report that contains the date and the days with 0. So we can just go straight to DAX Studio, open that, and we have it here. Oh, well, we need to write a test query, so it's evaluate. We need to summarize columns by date, and then days with 0, which is our days with 0 measure. That is good. We want the server timings because we are gonna analyze performance, so we need a first baseline. I'm wondering whether we need a filter, but we do not. Let me run the query. And it's slow. Let's see the result. And also make some space, but we do that later. Okay, it takes 4 seconds of CPU time, and the thing is really bad because if we look at the queries, we have a query that retrieves the date, another query that retrieves, again, the date, and a third query that retrieves the date and the last order date from the order table with a filter. But all these queries, they are really, really tiny. That means the entire calculation is executed in Formula Engine. There is basically nothing that we can do to push the calculation down to Storage Engine. This is the kind of challenging queries to optimize because when we can push calculation down to Storage Engine, we have a clear path to follow. When all the calculation is in Formula Engine, then it's a matter of trying to rewrite the code, trying to super optimize the loops and the iterations in order to make that faster. So it's gonna be more challenging than expected. And you also see it here, 99% of the time is spent in the Formula Engine. So we need the measure here. Let me use days with 0, click here, define the measure, and then gain some space. We have DAX Studio, so we can also format the code. Okay, what can we do to make that faster? Well, I think the main problem is this filter that retrieves the maximum sales order date from the date where the date is less than the current date. Now, the first thing is that we are working with date all the time, and this is not our best option. And we can also, I'm thinking what we can do. Let's start from the beginning. We need the current date. And we retrieve it from the maximum date. But actually, we could try to work instead with the current date with date. What we could do, we could create a table that contains all the dates with sales and then iterate on top of that to avoid doing this calculation. So the idea might be, let's start creating a table containing all the dates with sales for the current selection. And then once we have that table, we try to optimize the iterations there. So we will probably need to change most of the code or do some serious update. Let's do that. So the current date is fine, we need that. The first date ever, again, we need that, but yeah, we do need the first date ever. Instead of computing the previous date with sales, let's create a table, all dates with sales. Now, how can I retrieve all the dates with sales? I can retrieve all sales order date. The thing is, if I retrieve all sales order date, I will retrieve all the values of the order date column despite any filter. Whereas what I want to do is that the values of the date table in the sales table for the current selection. So that should be values of sales order date. But again, if I use values of sales order date, I will obtain the values of the sales order date in the current selection of the date. So I need to get rid of the filter from the date. That's the only filter I need to remove. Now I have a table that contains all the dates with sales. I do not have dates with no sales. And the previous date with sales will no longer use calculate because now I want to iterate over this table. So I need to find the max out of all dates with sales. Not all dates with sales, but a filter over a filter over all dates with sales where all dates contain sales order date, where sales order date is less or equal than the current date. Out of this filter, I retrieve the last order date. Now, the previous date is again the coalescence of previous date with sales and first date ever, and the result is current date minus previous date. So basically, what I'm doing, the big change is that instead of iterating over a date that contains all the dates, now I'm iterating over sales order date. And apart from that, that should be the same. Let me reduce the font a bit. Okay, we have a baseline of 4 seconds. Let's try this version that doesn't work. Why you don't work? Because it complains about the fact that filter expects a table expression. All dates with sales is a table, but it's computing with calculate. That should be a calculate table. Okay, it ran. We have the results, which is good, 0, 0, then 1. Yeah, it's just computing 0, 0, 1 because I do not have the filter. So let me check. I had the filter on silver. The results. Oh, I did all this stuff. Okay, I'm gonna cut that part. I did all the editing with this screen, so I need to go back. So I need a filter on silver, and I add it here with a treat as silver product color. Run it, but the result does not look correct because it shows 0, 0, 1, 0, 0, 1. So it's like this measure is not computing the same value as this measure. Let's call new days with 0, and we also want days with 0 new, because the first thing is that the two measures need to compute the same number, days with 0 new. Then we will worry about performance. And there's a space. Yes, you see that days with 0 goes on computing, well, my days with 0 new does not. So there's something wrong here. We retrieve the last date, the minimum date ever. All dates with sales retrieves the values of sales order date. And this should not be a remove filter. That should be a remove filter from the date only, because I want to keep the filter on the product. I want to get rid of the filter on the date. Let's see. Now I like it more. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So the measure is now computing the same value. We need to check whether it's faster. Let's get rid of that. And let's get rid of the filter here because we want the same data set we had earlier, and run it. Okay, it is still 100% Formula Engine, but it's faster. We went from 4 seconds to 1/2 a second. That is a bit better. I'm wondering whether we can make that faster or better, but actually this is all Formula Engine, so there is not much that we can do. Maybe the only interesting thing to note is that if we look at the result, you see that mostly this measure returns 0. I mean, this is a characteristic of this specific measure, that because we are computing the consecutive days with no sales, and we basically sell the product all the time, this measure will mostly return 0 all the time. And the thing is, we do not need to do any calculation to know that there are sales, because we return 0 when there are sales on the current date. So the scenario where the result is 0 is well known. If there are sales, the result is 0. If there are no sales, then and only then we go back searching for the previous date. That is the expensive operation. So we can rely on data distribution, knowing the data we are computing, knowing our data, and try to optimize it further. Basically, what I'm going to do is add a giant if statement at the beginning that says if the sales amount is equal to 0, then compute all this stuff. But if it happens that sales amount is not 0, then the result is 0. So now if the sales amount is 0, we do the calculation, that is the heavy part. But if sales amount is not 0, we just return 0. We have a baseline of 1.5 seconds. Let's see if that goes somewhere. And it does. Now it's half a second of execution time. So we basically moved from the first version, 4 and something seconds to compute the number, knowing that the number was just stick to formula engine. We try to optimize it by iterating over smaller columns and reducing the iterations. And then, in order to make it a bit faster, we just cut some time from the formula. Let's look at the code for the last time. And that's it. Yeah, I mean, that looks like a good solution. It's not the best you can... I don't know if it's the best, but I guess we can just now draw some conclusion. Computing consecutive days required us to think in a different way. We do not compute consecutive days. The entire idea of computing consecutive days is not present in DAX. But what we can do is search for the previous date with sales, check whether in the current date we have or not have sales, and then do simple math between integer values. I guess problem solved. The code is not the fastest on the planet, but half a second is not that bad. But at least that's what I was able to create with an unplugged video. If you have a better version of the code, or if you try a different idea, just write it down on the comments. Patrick Mode again. And hope you enjoyed it, and
Enjoy DAX.
enjoy DAX.
Enjoy DAX.